that the whole world is thinking one thing, but then all of a sudden this comes out and it's like, poof.
We actually cussed out Netanyahu here in Israel.
Every single one are pressuring to create a Palestinian state.
This is the Israel Guys.
Welcome to the Israel Guys, where we believe that in a world of negativity and fake news, you should connect to the true and authentic stories of Israel. Guys, this week we got a lot of news going on. We have former President of America, Donald Trump, cursing Netanyahu, the former Prime Minister of Israel, and blasting the nation of Israel. All this and a lot more coming right up.
Don't go away, guys. You're going to be surprised at what we're going to be talking about today. But make sure you subscribe if you're on YouTube and wherever else you're watching or listening. Make sure you hit subscribe. It's completely free, and hit the notification bell. Guys, we are running an end-of-year fundraising campaign for the Israel Guys and our volunteer work here in Israel. And because of generous matching donors, every dollar that you give right now will be doubled, which is twice the impact. So it's amazing. And if you appreciate our media work that we're doing, putting out the true and authentic stories of Israel, and you can give $5, $25, or $100. That will greatly help us launch into the year 2022, which we have incredible plans to exponentially grow our media. We only have until December 30th, that's about 16 days from now, to meet our goal. You can check out the entire campaign at the cause match link in the description below. And if you can give to support our work, keep the Israel Guys free, and keep us taking the fake news by storm, that's our goal. A gift would be greatly appreciated. Check out the link in the description below. Josh, everybody thought Donald J. Trump was Israel's greatest ally and friend. You know, that is up for debate, possibly still true. We're not going to belittle the amazing things that he has done for Israel.
And we'll bring him up in just a moment.
But he made some incredible, and by incredible, I don't necessarily mean positive statements regarding former Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israel this past week. We're going to get into that. But first, let's play a clip of his interview.
I was disappointed in Bibi just on a personal basis. When we have an election that it was a rigged election, like a third world country election, I think it's a terrible personal trait. I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him.
To give you a little background behind that interview, and there's a much more lengthy version. We have all our source links in the description below, so you can check out the entire story if you want. That was an interview with a senior Israeli journalist named Barak Ravid, who is also a contributor to Axios. And he interviewed former President Trump for a book that he is releasing here in Israel. But some of the statements, like, I mean, you heard it yourself. Right. There was a bleep in there. So right. We keep this show as kosher as we can. That's not a very nice statement about Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Especially when the world is under the skies,
like,
Luke.
They're out there on the internet. Yeah. It's not just an interview for a book anymore.
Right.
But
when the skies, this is what I want to say, is that the whole world is thinking one thing. But then all of a sudden this comes out and it's like, poof, it blows the cover. Like, what in the world? Okay, so now what is the story underneath? And that's what we're going to get into. But before we do that, Luke, we
want to recognize what President Trump
like good
did
people.
For Israel.
I mean, we consider ourselves, moral values and these things. You know what you do to somebody that did something, you recognize them. You know, Trump did some really amazing things. So we're going to recognize those for just a second here. Before we talk about what we've just mentioned, okay? We're going to get a lot more into that. But first, recognition is vital because he really did some amazing things. Mm-hmm. Trump recognized sovereignty on the Golan Heights. That was big. Like, the international world refused to recognize that. And Trump said, no, that's like common sense. You do this, right?
Well, a lot of people don't realize how big of a deal that was because they think Golan Heights, that's not Gaza or the West Bank. That's part of Israel. But like every peace deal that's been put forward for decades, the Golan Heights has been part of that, actually, like giving that back to Syria.
Right.
So that was a really big deal.
And Jerusalem, I mean, Jerusalem's probably the biggest thing ever, is moving the capital, the embassy to Jerusalem. That's and verifying, okay, Jerusalem is the capital of the nation of Israel. That's huge.
Having the courage to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Like, people literally said that it would start World War III, and President Trump had the courage to do it.
Right. So you're talking about a lot of courage there. You got a lot of other things going on. As we go down the list, there's other things that are great. The Trump administration said that the Israeli settlements, this is under Mike Pompeo, said the Israeli settlements were not illegal per se, right? So that was like a change of international perception of what Israeli settlements were. So, I mean, we're talking about a huge deal. When that statement came out, that rocked everybody. They're like, whoa. Like somebody's finally got some common sense.
Josh, other things that President Trump did, facilitated the Abraham Accords, which is huge. You have a lot of countries, Arab countries, that have now made peace with Israel. Also, President Trump had the courage to defund the PLO office, or to shut down the PLO offices in Washington, D.C., and cut a lot of funding to the PA that was going to terrorism here in Israel, and defund UNRWA, which was also feeding terrorism. We don't have time to get into it now.
Luke,
there was one big thing, though,
Yeah.
that President Trump wanted to go down in history as doing that he did not do, or was not successful at doing, and that was the deal of the century.
That's exactly right. And that's what I'm going to say. The deal of the century was his goal. He accomplished all these amazing things. And we're not talking about all the other things he did in the world. Like, a lot of great things he did. He did a lot of great things for America. You know, we're not... This is just relation to Israel. We're in Israel. Right. We're talking about Israel. We're just going to talk about these things. The one thing he wanted to do, the highest priority on his list, he didn't accomplish. And that is what the fuming's about.
Right.
It's about creating a Palestinian state. Whoa. Yeah. That's actually what it's about. He didn't say it was about that in the beginning, but we're gonna like
Josh, we'll get more into that, but I want to give context, okay, for where all this came from. You heard the 15-second clip where he actually cussed out Netanyahu here in Israel and said horrible things about Israel. Let's get more into what he actually said. Guys, this is not rumors. This is not reports. This is very, very true, and all of our source links are in the description below. You don't have to believe us. You can check it all out yourself. So Barak Ravid, senior Israeli journalist, contributor to Axios, interviewed President Trump for a book that is releasing here in Israel. I want to read some of the quotes that President Trump said. He said, nobody did more for Bibi, who's Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I liked Bibi. I still like Bibi. But I also like loyalty. The first person to congratulate Biden was Bibi. And not only did he congratulate him, he did it on tape. And it was on tape. Regarding Joe Biden's election, and also Bibi, Trump went on to say, the first person who congratulated Biden was Bibi Netanyahu, the man that I did more for than any other person I dealt with. Bibi could have stayed quiet. He's made a terrible mistake. And then he went on to say what you heard in the clip there. Early? Okay, let's use this. He was very early, like earlier than most. I haven't spoken to him since. Then he cussed out former Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu.
Luke, can we break down this for a second? So you got this whole rundown. You just went through it. You broke it down. Okay, but I want to break it down even further. Okay, now you got these two accusations. First, he's the first one. Okay, well, that's not true. He's not the first one. And then he says he's, one of the earliest.
I too, if I remember correctly, Netanyahu actually got criticism for not congratulating Biden soon enough after the election.
He was among the last.
Right.
Like, not even on the front end. First, certainly not the first, not the second, not even close to the beginning, not even in the middle. He's one of the last world leaders to congratulate. Now, we're not even saying that's a good thing. I mean, you could go both ways. But
that's
what
just
Trump
a fact,
is saying is
just to debunk that myth. But
Netanyahu had respected Trump, and even to the point where he said, "Thank you. These things are amazing." Even when he congratulated Biden in the video clip, you can go check it out yourself. He actually thanks the President Trump at the time for all that he did for Israel. Well, Trump takes a personal, right.
And
offense.
my question is that America is Israel's greatest ally. Okay.
Yeah.
What choice did Netanyahu have? Okay. A new president comes in, Democrat, Republican, whether or not you believe their support for Israel is going to be high or low. He's the incoming president, and Israel wants to keep a very good relationship with America. So, of course, he's going to congratulate him. And he has every right to do that.
And obviously, he's not going to get in on the internal fight.
Sense.
He's not going to get in an internal fight. Just like we would never expect America to get in an internal fight of Israel's elections. Okay, so there was problems. Yeah, well, we're not going to have those kind of things happening. You're not going to get involved in the other side. There's nothing else he could have done, and we'll just say that. But the real rift, what's the real rift that went on? Because they actually had a rift, the big one, and that was when it come to annexation.
Right.
When there was a little bit of a unexpected, maybe it was miscommunication. But this is what I really think the real story is about right here, Luke. And that's when Netanyahu announces the annexation.
Right.
It's almost like they missed that was a part of the plan. Now, it was a part of the plan, but maybe there was a major misunderstanding.
So the background story here
give it to us.
Is that everybody was eagerly anticipating President Trump's plan to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It went on for several years, and they were not releasing it, kept being delayed. So finally, his big plan is going to be released at the White House, right? The deal of the century. Everybody's been speculating. We speculated. We spent a lot of hours researching and covering the topic. Okay, so the deal of the century is announced. It basically calls for Israel to hold on to about a third of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and then the rest of Judea and Samaria to be turned into eventually like a Palestinian state, right?
Yeah.
So Netanyahu gets up after President Trump presents the deal of the century, and he immediately says, this is not the deal of the century, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. And he's basically says, we, as Israel, we are eagerly embracing this plan. And then he goes on to say, to start talking about how Israel is going to like permanently hold on to the parts of Judea and Samaria that are mentioned in the deal of the century,
Right.
AKA annex, right? So Trump is surprised by that. And we have this full podcast that you can listen to by Axios. And if all this is true, that this senior Israeli journalist was actually in the room for a lot of these things, then it's very interesting because Trump's administration immediately understands that Netanyahu is talking about annexation for a third of Judea and Samaria, and Netanyahu actually told his staff and his team and reporters that that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to immediately go back to Israel, present it to the cabinet, and get annexation rolling. As soon as the Trump administration, Jared Kushner, finds out, they immediately lash out at the entire Israeli administration and say, no, like that is not what we meant at all.
Well, Luke, even more background is that, of course, Bibi is in the right wing parties of Israel. He sees an opportunity because Israel has so much pressure all the time around it, specifically in this area of Judea and Samaria. Bibi sees a window to annex pieces of Judea and Samaria with world approval. Of course, he's going to take that, and he goes to do it. But here's the other thing he knows: the Arabs will not agree to the other side, and that's why Trump got livid, right? That's why he got upset, because he needed it all as a package. He didn't want Bibi running out ahead and saying, we've got to do this. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Let's grab that annexation as quick as possible,
right?
Because we know that the Arabs will not accept.
Exactly.
And we've got a lot of
history. So that was
that
was in Netanyahu's mind, right?
Right.
And of course, this is our opinion and our analysis now.
Makes a lot of sense.
So in Netanyahu's mind, he thinks, I got to grab this opportunity. The Arabs will never agree, so we don't have to worry about a Palestinian state. In Trump's mind, this is his opportunity to go down in history to make the Palestinians happy and to make Israel happy. Israel gets a third, Palestinians get 2/3, they get an official state, everybody's happy. Trump, obviously, we talk about a lot. A Western mindset just doesn't fit in with a Middle Eastern mindset. So Trump doesn't understand that, for decades and decades, the Arabs have never agreed to any of the peace deals that have been presented. Obviously, they're not going to agree to this one. Why? Because Israel's not leaving Israel. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so Bibi knows that, but Trump doesn't know that. So he says all or nothing. And so when he hears that Israel's ready to just move forward, he says absolutely not.
Right. Luke, can I say something real quick? All the other things that Trump did, we thought were great. This, even from the beginning, the deal of the century, you and I, we actually bashed this from the beginning. We were like, whoa. Whenever you tell me, when I'm living inside Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland of Israel, that you want to create a Palestinian state inside of these borders, a terror state inside of these borders, you're going to find a little resistance from me, because I'm a Christian Zionist, and all Christian Zionists should be in the same boat. So what happened? And actually Netanyahu, the former prime minister here, is actually a little bit in that boat too, saying, no, we don't want a terrorist state here. Now, Trump needed that because he needed to go down in history to make this peace deal. We were never for this. We were never for it. And that's why we covered it so extensively back in the day. Now, this leads into the discussion. Trump said, and let's quote him here, Netanyahu did not want to make peace. Never did. Okay, so this is why Trump's view of their conversation. He says, he continues, I think he, referring to Benny Gantz, wanted to make a deal. If he won, so the elections, this is the time the elections were going on. If he won, I think it would have been a lot easier. He's saying he could have gotten a deal passed through Benny Gantz, who is a leftist in the situation and really doesn't care about, he doesn't have a strong cut up Judea and Samaria, let's not create a Palestinian state. Bibi has actually a core that says, no, we don't want to create a Palestinian state inside. He can't say that. He's political. He's a politician. Right. But he doesn't want to create a Palestinian state in the middle of Israel's heartland. It's just he doesn't, he can't. So that's where this goes into this conversation. They really start missing each other. Because Bibi's trying to hold on to the land of Israel. Trump is actually trying to push Israel to give it away. That's the basis.
Trump basically goes on to say, he comes into this peacemaking process and he says, quote, I had thought the Palestinians were impossible and the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true. Now, we don't have time, but if you go back in history, Israel has been very willing to give away land for peace. In fact, they gave away more than 90% of the land that they recaptured and liberated in 1967. And did it bring any peace? No. Brought more terrorism. Gaza Strip, giving that to the Arabs, brought more terrorism and violence.
Look, I just want to say about this quote is that he actually, this is where he stops being a personal issue between him and Netanyahu, and he bashes Israel. This is when it gets a little bit worse.
This is, I guess what we want to bring out here too is that it's revealing Trump's true intentions all along.
Yeah.
And which were in question. True intentions were, and he actually says this. We'll get in more into, because we're going to have a part 2 to this episode where we'll talk about at the end of the show today, to get more into Mahmoud Abbas and Trump's relationship with him. Calls him a father figure. But Trump actually, he came right out and said his intentions were to give something to the Israelis to make them happy and give something to the Arabs to make them happy. Basically, like, give everybody a little something, they're all happy and they'll live in peace with each other. Well, unfortunately, like we've said so many times, that's a Western mindset. It doesn't work here in the Middle East. But he thought, he'd heard all these horrible things about the Palestinians and they wouldn't negotiate. Then he met Mahmoud Abbas, and now he kind of considered him like a father figure, and we're going to get into that later. And now he found that the Israelis won't do anything to make peace. They're very hard to get along with, and that the Palestinians would have been a much better partner for peace.
And he quotes, he says, even most recently, when we came up with the maps, this is when their conversation goes farther down the line. He says, Netanyahu's action was, this is good. Everything was always great, but he did not want to make a deal. That was the quote from Trump. So the whole time, and I just want to say, thank God, now that we see it in the rearview mirror, we understand the pressure that Netanyahu had from the Trump administration to do one thing, and that was to create a Palestinian terror state. Okay, maybe Trump didn't know that. I don't know. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'd like to.
It's just
but it's a fact.
That American mindset coming in trying to solve this age-old conflict.
And maybe, he doesn't have the grid for the Middle East, whatever the problem is here. The facts is that he was pressuring to create a terrorist state. And we're going to talk about Abbas, and you're going to be shocked when we talk about it next week, who this father figure person he mentions is. Obviously, I want to love to give him the benefit of the doubt on that too, because Abbas is a wretched man. You talk about, oh my gracious, we're going to get into
he's
that.
a terrorist.
A terrorist. Like all out terrorists.
Like he should be sitting in prison, not as the chairman of the Palestinian Authority.
I just want to say, thank God that Netanyahu had the strength and the political savviness, really, to maneuver this thing. This could have gone a totally different situation. We could be sitting right next to a Palestinian terror state right now, shooting rockets into Israel, right inside the biblical heartland of Israel. Thank God that's not the situation.
And just to make sure we responded to Trump's accusations that Israel won't do anything for peace, like I mentioned, for decades, Israel gave away almost over more than 90% of the land. Every single peace deal that was put out, Israel always accepted. Even going back to the creation of the state of Israel, Israel always accepted. The Arabs always rejected. Israel actually tried to give away almost 100% of the West Bank, the heartland, right? And thank God the Arabs rejected it, because then there would have been a Palestinian state, a terrorist state in the heartland of Israel. So Israel has always been willing to come to the table. They've been always willing to accept deals that honestly would have been horrible for them and suicidal, but the Arabs have always rejected. So it's historically inaccurate to say that the Israelis wouldn't do anything for peace.
Right. Yeah, they've always been ready to and willing to work out a peace deal, even in the leftist view. The leftists are always pressuring Israel, and it's never in Israel's favor. Right. Can I just say that? It's never in Israel's favor. There's never been a situation and inside of a peace deal, there's been other these things. Like we mentioned, Trump did some great things. But inside of a peace deal, because every single one of them, and I've got to get this clear to the world, every single one are pressuring to create a Palestinian state. Yeah. Guys, there's other options.
100%.
Let's just say that.
100%.
There's other options. Well, we don't have to create a Palestinian terror state in the land of Israel. That's the last thing on the planet that needs to be done. Really. Yeah. That's the worst thing we could ever do.
And the two-state solution has died. Practically speaking, it has died.
Trump tried to revive something differently, but it something totally different. Well, in the end of the game, it was the same story. Right. Creating a Palestinian terror state in the heartland of Israel.
By the way, if you're wondering if Netanyahu was offended by Trump's remarks, who knows? But his office issued a statement, and he said that he, quote, greatly appreciates President Trump's great contribution to the state of Israel and its security. He also greatly appreciates the importance of the strong alliance between Israel and the United States, and therefore it was important for him to congratulate the incoming U.S. president. That's kind of common sense. So way to go.
Way to go.
former Prime Minister
Yeah,
Netanyahu.
acting diplomatically.
By the way, on a little bit of a negative note, President Trump did push Israel to a building freeze amongst the settlements of Judea and Samaria.
Yeah.
And that's something we know personally. That's like we have actually had settlement leaders on the show before during the building freeze, and they said there was like months and months and months during the Trump administration where they were not able to get a single building approved whatsoever. And Barak Ravid, the journalist that interviewed Trump, he even asked Trump about his asking Netanyahu to freeze settlement development for a year or two.
Right.
Because Trump was so unhappy about the threat of annexation. Right? And Trump said, yeah, he wasn't real happy about that, but he did it, and there was an actual building freeze. It was like an incognito, like an under the cover building freeze that happened.
Yeah, because the top layer was everything's amazing. We've got this amazing relationship with the Trump administration, and we're going to bring out this peace deal. Well, and all the other things that were happening were good. This layer, guys, is what we're revealing is this was potentially a terrible moment.
Yeah.
Like, thank God that didn't happen. But this was the pressure, and this is what Bibi here, and obviously, thank God Bibi, he had the power to say no, but in this situation, he doesn't.
Right.
He actually, there was a building freeze. You think that only happened under Obama? Well, most people think that that's only happened under Obama. And everybody that's sitting there saying, no, you must have missed something. No, I live here. There was a building freeze on Judea and Samaria under the Trump administration, period, exclamation point. That's just
guys,
it. That's the way it was.
The takeaway from this story is that, and we want to be clear, we very much appreciate all of the incredible things that President Trump did. He had the courage to do what no other president has ever had the courage to do. But we want to also be clear on exactly what Trump's intentions were regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and his peace plan for Israel. And as believers and as Christians and supporters of Israel, we have to have our eyes wide open.
Yep.
Okay, these are things that Trump said this past week. This is his actual attitude and relationship with Israel and former Prime Minister Netanyahu. And you don't have to believe us. We have all the sources and the links below. You can listen to a much bigger story than what we were able to present on the show today. Go check it out yourself. By the way, part 2 is coming on Sunday. Yep, that's right, Sunday, December 19th. And that's going to be a special right here on YouTube. And that's going to be about Trump's relationship with Mahmoud Abbas, who is the chairman, basically the leader of the Palestinian Authority, and his relationship to what Trump said, quote, he regarded Abbas as a father figure. So did you know that Abbas was the mastermind behind the Munich massacre that left 11 Israeli athletes dead at the 1972 Olympics? We're
Luke, unless that's fact. It's not just fiction. That's fact. It really happened.
Yeah. So we're gonna get into Trump's relationship with Mahmoud Abbas and who Mahmoud Abbas was and still is today as the leader of the Palestinian Authority and what Trump wanted to make the Palestinian terrorist state in Israel's heartland. So make sure you subscribe, mark it down in your calendars. Part 2 special episode coming on Sunday, December 19th. Subscribe on YouTube or your favorite platform, including Rumble. And if you can donate to our end of year fundraising campaign, link is in the description below. We only have until December 30th to meet our goals, and that helps us keep the true and authentic stories coming out of Israel. As always, make sure to tune out the fake. And by the way, let us know what you think about this story in the comments below. Tune out the fake news and tune into what is actually happening right here in the land of Israel. We'll be back next week here at the Israel Guys. Hi guys, thanks so much for watching. 2 quick things before you go. 1, smash that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notifications bell so you don't miss out on any more of our content. Secondly, if you want to help us produce more stories and authentic truth straight from Israel's heartland, you can do so at patreon.com/theisraelguys or at our very own website. It's theisraelguys.com. Both links are in the description below.